The city glowed under a burning sky. From the marble rooftops of the Palatine Hill, the sound of trumpets echoed through the air. Deep, triumphant, eternal. The people of Rome filled the streets, their cheers rising like smoke toward the heavens. The eternal city, they called it. Caput Mundi, the head of the world. Gold shimmered from the armor of the legions as they marched beneath banners dyed crimson in the blood of 1,000 conquests. The emperor watched from his balcony, his eyes reflecting both pride and fear. He had inherited an empire of gods, but ruled over men, fragile, ambitious, treacherous men. In the taverns below, the wine was red as the Tiber, and the laughter of merchants mixed with the whispers of philosophers. Somewhere, a poet was reciting verses to a crowd, singing of the glory that would never fade. But even as he spoke, the foundations beneath his words trembled. The marble was beginning to crack. A cool wind passed through the city, carrying the faint scent of smoke, not from fire, but from time itself, eroding everything it touched. Rome stood vast and unshakable, yet within its walls, something had begun to rot. The senators still dressed in fine togas, but their eyes had grown hollow. They spoke of honor and virtue, but behind closed doors, they traded favors like coins. The gods of Olympus, once worshipped with fear and reverence, were now reduced to marble idols collecting dust in the temples. The old faith was dying, and with it, the certainty that Rome was eternal. At the heart of this empire sat men who believed they could rule the world forever. But power, like the sun, blinds those who stare at it too long. Emperor Marcus Aurelius once wrote that all empires fall, that even Rome would one day be nothing more than dust. He was a philosopher, not merely a ruler. He understood the fragility of human ambition. Yet even he could not stop the decay that followed his reign. After him came Commodus, his own son, vain, cruel, and foolish, a man who believed himself to be a living god. "Let the people see their god fight!" Commodus would shout, stepping into the arena dressed as Hercules, slaughtering men and beasts alike for sport. The Senate feared him, the people adored him, and when he was finally murdered, the city rejoiced. But something within Rome had already died with him. From that moment, the throne became a prize to be bought, not inherited. The Praetorian Guard, those sworn to protect the emperor, began selling the imperial crown to the highest bidder. In one infamous moment, they auctioned the empire itself, standing upon the palace steps, shouting to the crowd, "Who will buy Rome?" And someone did. His name was Didius Julianus, a wealthy senator. He offered the soldiers more gold than any other man. They crowned him emperor, and 40 days later, they killed him too. Such was Rome in its twilight, a kingdom of greed, betrayal, and ghosts. The empire grew too large for any man to hold. From the deserts of Africa to the icy rivers of Germania, legions fought endless wars against enemies who no longer feared Rome's name. Each victory drained the treasury, and each defeat tore another piece from the empire's heart. Farmers abandoned their lands. Trade routes fell silent. Even the Tiber seemed to flow slower, heavy with the ashes of forgotten triumphs. In the east, the city of Constantinople began to rise, a new capital for a divided world. Emperor Constantine, with the cross on his banner, claimed divine favor. He ended the persecutions and embraced Christianity, but in doing so, he fractured Rome's soul. For centuries, the Romans had believed in many gods, each representing a part of their world, their fears, their hopes. Now, one god ruled above all others, and the temples of Jupiter, Mars, and Venus fell silent. The old gods had been the spirit of Rome itself, proud, violent, merciless. Without them, the empire seemed softer, uncertain. A senator once whispered, "When the gods left us, so did our strengths." But no one listened. The new faith promised salvation beyond the grave, and that was enough for a people tired of endless war and empty glory. The legions, once the steel heart of the empire, had changed too. No longer Roman-born men fighting for honor. They were now mercenaries, hired from distant lands. Goths, Franks, Vandals, men who spoke strange tongues and cared nothing for the city they defended. They fought for gold, not glory. On the northern borders, a storm was rising. Tribes long pushed beyond the frontier were uniting, and among them rode a people the Romans could not understand, the Huns. They came from the steppes like a plague of ghosts, swift, merciless, unstoppable. Entire villages vanished overnight. Those who survived spoke of riders who never dismounted, whose faces were scarred, whose arrows flew like thunder. The Huns did not conquer for land. They conquered for fear, and fear spread faster than fire. In Rome, the emperors changed like the seasons. Some ruled for years, others for days. Assassins walked the corridors of the palace like shadows, and poison became more common than wine. The Senate was a stage, the empire a play, and everyone pretended not to see the crumbling set behind them. But the people still believed. They had to. For to admit Rome was dying was to admit the gods had lied. And yet the signs were everywhere. The aqueducts fell into disrepair. The baths grew cold. The great libraries burned or were looted for their marble. Even the Colosseum, once filled with the roars of 100,000 voices, began to decay. Its stones taken by men who no longer remembered why it had been built. At night, beggars huddled in the shadows of statues that no longer had names. The empire that had given the world roads, laws, and order now could not even feed its own citizens. In the year 410, the unthinkable happened. The city of Rome, the heart of the world, was sacked. For 8 centuries, its walls had stood unbroken. No foreign enemy had ever crossed them. But on that August night, Alaric and his Visigoths entered through the Salarian Gate. The streets that once paraded emperors now echoed with screams. Fires lit the sky. Temples were looted, statues shattered. And as dawn rose, the eternal city lay silent. A Roman mother held her child in the ruins of her home. "Is this the end?" she whispered. An old man beside her, once a scholar, shook his head. "No," he said softly, "this is what we have become." For 3 days, the Visigoths plundered the city. Then, as suddenly as they came, they left, leaving behind a scar that would never heal. Saint Jerome, living far away in Bethlehem, wrote in despair, "The city that conquered the world has been conquered. Who can remain unshaken?" Rome never truly recovered. Its power, once drawn from the sword, now depended on prayer and politics. The emperors of the West ruled in name only, puppets of generals and priests. Meanwhile, in the East, the Byzantine emperors looked on, inheritors of the Roman name, but not its soul. The final blow came not from an enemy of might, but of inevitability. By the mid-5th century, the Western Empire was nothing more than a fading ember. And in that dim light, one last emperor remained. A boy, barely 16, named Romulus Augustulus. History has a cruel sense of irony. The first king of Rome was Romulus. The last emperor would bear the same name. Odoacer, a Germanic general serving under Roman command, saw the truth. There was no empire left to serve. He marched on Ravenna, the last imperial capital, and met the boy emperor. Accounts differ on what was said, but one version tells it like this. Yes. Odoacer entered the throne room, armor glinting in the dim light. The young emperor stood before him, trembling, wearing the purple cloak of Rome. "You don't have to kill me," the boy said. "I am no threat to you." Odoacer looked at him, a child dressed in the ashes of an empire. "No," he said quietly, "you are not." He removed the imperial diadem from the boy's head and placed it into a chest. Rome needs no emperor now. And with that gesture, the Western Roman Empire ceased to exist. It was the year 476 AD. No trumpet sounded, no poet sang. The greatest empire the world had ever known ended with a whisper. Yet Rome did not truly die. Its roads still crossed continents. Its language still shaped the tongues of nations unborn. Its laws, its dreams, its arrogance, all lived on, like echoes in the marble ruins. Some say Rome never fell. It simply changed form, reborn in kingdoms, republics, and empires that came after. Every conqueror who raised a sword believed he was reviving Rome. Every city that sought to rule the world called itself a new, eternal city. And perhaps that is the curse of Rome, to never truly die, but to haunt every civilization that follows. As the sun sets over the broken Colosseum, the wind carries a faint whisper through the stones. Glory is fleeting, but the hunger for it is eternal. The city slept beneath the ashes of its own greatness. Grass now grew between the cracks of the Forum. The once proud marble columns stood like gravestones, pale and silent under the rising moon. Owls nested in the ruins of temples once dedicated to Jupiter and Venus. The wind, when it passed through the arches, made a sound like the ghosts of senators whispering their regrets. Rome, the mother of civilization, was now an orphan of time. But even in ruin, there was a beauty, a tragic beauty that made poets weep and pilgrims fall to their knees. Travelers from the north, who had never seen such vast stones, wandered through the shadowed streets in awe. "Who built this?" they asked. "Gods or men?" And an old monk, passing by, would answer softly, "Both, and neither." For both forgot humility. The Western Empire had fallen, but the Roman name lived on, carried east across the Aegean, to a city that gleamed like a reflection of paradise. Constantinople. There, under domes of gold and towers of shining marble, the Eastern Empire thrived. It was Rome reborn, though its people spoke Greek, and its emperors prayed to the Christian God. Byzantium, they called it, though they themselves preferred Roman. For in their hearts, the old flame had not died. It merely changed its color. In the Hagia Sophia, incense rose like morning mist, and choirs sang in languages that Caesar would not have recognized. Yet the rhythm of Rome still pulsed through the veins of this new empire. Its laws, its coins, its ambition. The dream of eternal power had survived, disguised as faith. From this new Rome came emperors both wise and terrible. Justinian, the restorer, the dreamer, the emperor who sought to rebuild what had been lost. He would stand on the balcony of his palace, looking out over the Bosporus, and whisper to his generals, "The empire is not dead. It merely sleeps. Wake it." And they tried. His armies marched westward once more, reconquering Africa, Italy, even the city of Rome itself. For a brief moment, the old world flickered back to life, a ghost illuminated by the light of ambition. But ghosts cannot live in sunlight. The wars drained the treasury. Plague swept through Constantinople like a tide of death. Justinian himself survived, but the empire's strength never did. He built great monuments to eternity, but eternity had already made up its mind. Back in the West, Europe was being born from Rome's ashes. Kingdoms rose where provinces once stood. The Goths, the Franks, the Lombards. All of them carried a piece of Rome within them. Its architecture, its faith, its arrogance. They crowned kings, but called them Caesar. They built palaces, but modeled them after Roman villas. Even their languages, rough and guttural, softened over generations into something that still echoed Latin. Rome was gone, yet everywhere. It lived in the stones, in the laws, in the pride of men who had never seen its walls. A monk in a cold northern monastery would spend his nights copying Roman manuscripts by candlelight, tracing each letter as though it were a prayer. He did not know the faces of Cicero or Virgil, but he believed, with the faith of a child, that by preserving their words, he was keeping civilization alive. And in a way, he was right. The story of Rome did not end in fire. It ended in silence and in memory. The people who came after would look upon its ruins and feel two things: envy and fear. Envy, because no city before or after had ever reached such majesty. Fear, because even that majesty had fallen. In the centuries that followed, Rome became a lesson, a warning carved into the bones of history. Everything that rises too high falls by its own weight. Yet the dream was too seductive to die. When the Franks built their empire under Charlemagne, they called it the Holy Roman Empire, a name born of longing, not truth. For even